We've got a brilliant panel this afternoon talking about Vivienne Westwood's show. So, panel, I would love it if you could introduce yourselves.
Hello, I'm DrNoki.
I'm Bel Jacobs, a fashion journalist.
I'm Katie Barron, I'm an author and journalist.
And I'm Stephen Jones and I'm a milliner.
And I'm Daryoush Haj-Najafi. I thought it's a bit obvious to do this, but since we haven't done this yet this season, I thought it'd be interesting, and obviously with Westwood, it's always there. And she sometimes likes to talk about politics more than she does like to talk about the clothes. So I thought it'd be nice if our preamble this afternoon was politics and fashion. And obviously, DrNoki has a lot to say about this. We have fantastic Mr. Stephen Jones, who knows all about everything ever. So let's take it away, guys. What do we think about? You know, there's often a cause with you know, Vivienne Westwood's been very strong on the Bernard Manning. She's been very strong on climate change. She helped invent punk.
I mean, I think any fashion that has meaning always has got a political message in it, and is always a result of politics anyway. But you know, she was really the person who sort of capitalised on this and made an issue. And in 1,000 years' time, when people have forgotten every other designer, they'll think, oh, Vivienne Westwood, she did interesting things. She did that thing called punk, didn't she? Wasn't it all about political attitude? She is the important one, just because she thought about that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's partly one of the reasons why she's still so relevant, because I think, you know, in the current era where largely popular culture is so, you know, been consumed by celebrity culture, that it's really, really important to have somebody that has a message, you know, whether it's a magazine or a designer that actually stands for something specific. You know, whether or not they can completely, you know, that comes to fruition through their work. You know, how much change they can affect, who knows? But I think the fact that, you know, we were talking earlier and someone said, well, they hadn't actually seen Bradley Manning, you know, they weren't aware of him before they'd seen it on a t-shirt, on the Menswear t-shirt last season. So I think that in itself proves that it still works, that it's still got a place, her activism. So it'll be really fascinating to see what the cause is this year, because the one thing's for sure is that she doesn't necessarily stick to the same kind of line of questioning, the same cause. So it's kind of anyone's guess what it might be this time round.
I tend to think that anyone who's in the public eye has a responsibility actually to support a cause or make things known. So I really appreciate that side of what she does. I think it's fun, and actually I was the one who said I hadn't heard Bradley Manning.
Yeah.
And then so that's, you know, that has come out for me watching her last collection. I really enjoy it.
Well, it's her core brand value, isn't it? So it's important for her to keep delving back into it all the time, to keep her self-contemporary, use her canvas in the right way, and then where, you know, her butterfly is her beautiful ideas of couture and creating and cutting and keeping her style going. You know, but it is very important that, you know, we have somebody like Vivienne Westwood that keeps the core brand value of politics on a canvas, down a catwalk, you know, blazing high.
I think she makes it very clear, doesn't she, also that the fashion is a vehicle for her politics. I sometimes feel a bit odd about that, like she's slightly devaluing fashion in relation to politics, and that. So I'm never quite sure how I feel about that, though.
Well, it can be a bit awkward as well, can't it? Because, you know, if you're a mega global brand, it can be a little bit awkward at times, the idea that you're actually sort of talking about issues with sort of consumer culture, and actually, but you're still selling a lot. You know, when she was sort of talking about stop buying so much stuff, but fundamentally, you know, you've got a huge global corporation here that's selling stuff. That can sit slightly awkwardly, but I think, you know, she's obviously very aware of that, and I think she's still. That's why these messages are so important.
There are contradictions in what she says and what she does, but I honestly believe, and I've spoken to her, that her heart is very much in the right place. I think she has a lot of passion for the causes that she supports and promotes. But there are issues as a fashion journalist. Contradictions.
I mean, I think it's interesting that so much of fashion is about the politics of whether the lapel's that big or that big, and actually where, hey, she's got a bigger palette to work with. She deals with all society. There's nothing which isn't, you know, part of her repertoire. She's just got a really broad framework of it, and I think that's fantastic. I think it's weird how often nowadays within the fashion world she's sort of relegated to a sort of a little area which is almost not considered to be mainstream fashion, just because it isn't sort of nice in inverted commas. I think that's really weird when you see about her placement within the rest of the fashion world.
One of the things I I interviewed her a couple of years ago for Vogue Home Japan, and I wrote in the beginning, you know, the thing about Westwood is that she managed to do something political that wasn't just T-shirts. You know, it wasn't just a slogan. It was actually the cut. And it was actually the fabrication.
And she still does that, which is extraordinary. I mean, that's where it comes from. I don't know if you saw a TV show a couple of years ago. It was about her cutting a pair of trousers, and there she was, drawing and actually doing what Vivienne. It was like the most amazing thing you ever saw.
Yeah, you do get the impression that at her core, she's still anarchic, which is really important. You know, she's still railing against the things that she believes are problematic, you know, in our lives, and I think that's really a sensibility that's really to be applauded in a lot of ways.
JJ, you're not exactly known for not, you know, you're possibly a child of Westwood.
Well, I very much I grew up in the 80s. A hairdresser called Willie Rosedale had a wardrobe in his salon, and a cousin of his called Sandy Gordon was a pattern cutter. Do you know Sandy? Do you know a guy called? Yeah, so I have a connection somewhere on the line away up in Aberdeen. And that wardrobe was glass fronted, and it had everything in it because he was able to get it into the buying side of it. So we had a club called Fever, and there was a girl called Kerry who was our Sarah Stockbridge kind of character, and she wore the crowns, you know, the orbs, you know, the mini Krillins, the whole work. So, and we had ID photographers came up, and they were like, "There's more Westwood in this club than, and this is in Aberdeen." So. I was very much influenced by it. I could never get it. I remember borrowing one of Westwood's suits from Willie for a wedding, and it was a slightly oversized man's jacket, sort of slightly farmer-esque. You know, she was playing kind of sort of country dandy, and I loved it. It was the buttons, the gold buttons. It was, you know, there was just the detail was just devilish. You know what I mean? It was something I couldn't afford, but I had an inroad to being part of.
Is something of a rebel yourself, though, and in your work also, and working with other designers, it's sort of with that 80s idea of rebellion. What about the tension between rebellion and the decadence of rebellion, and the tension between rebellion and the decadence of rebellion, and kind of that like fantastic idea that rebels are all, you know, Trotsky's idea that rebels are all just impatient to be aristocrats, and
I'm sure I am. I'd love to make money in what I do, but I can't as yet. You know, I've got a lot of hard work, and it comes back to you were saying about Westwood be having a big global brand, but her core value is something political, and no other brand has that. You know, no other brand can say that they actually started designing with any foundation to do with, you know, two fingers up to society,
which is amazing.
Which is amazing, and still, and you know, she does run a big global company, and there's lots of argument, but you know, brands don't have good core value. They're very just, you know, high street, you know, derivatives, generic, you know, driven by global, you know, passions to be a brand leader. Do you know what I mean?
Plus, of course, you can reach a lot of people by having, you know, so many stores and so many outlets, and having that kind of presence, which is interesting because if we talk about the political side of this, you think, you know, there might be certain people, whether it's a generational thing or pockets out there, where you think, how do people consume their information? Actually, you know, it's totally feasible. I think that a designer like her may well be as influential for a younger generation as, you know, what you'll see on the news. People, they may not read, you know, watch the 10 o'clock news or read a newspaper, but it's another kind of, it's a more relevant, it's another kind of channel of communication, which is really significant. So I think, and as you were saying before, that's why it's important that designers and magazines and, you know, everyone kind of invested in creative culture does take some kind of responsibility for the bigger picture as well.
Well, celebrity culture's taken fashion and taken it on the entertainment of the world, you know what I mean? Globalization, you know, the whole, you know, technology, everything now is at hand just to keep us entertained from politics, you know what I mean? So, and now we've got famous people rocking out, you know what I mean? You've got Emmerdale wearing Westwood. It's still somewhere along the line, those people in Emmerdale still have politics attached to them, even though they want nothing to do with that. Do you know what I mean? So it just, you know, for me as an artist, a textile artist, that's what I've tried to achieve with my cutting of a t-shirt. you know, I know Lucio Fontana, that's kind of where I want to be with cutting. You know, I want to cut, and that's, you know, look beyond this t-shirt, look beyond this brand. You know, that's what Westwood started. You know, she may not, in some people's eyes, you know what I mean, and get knocked constantly, but people can't get past that armor. You know, that's what she has. She started, and she still pushes forward, and people buy into. And whether it costs a fortune or not, I don't know. It's still attached to a political kind of agenda,
which folk gets really upset about, which is
well,
fantastic.
Well, this is
still 25 years later.
Yeah, because they're part of the entertainment of the world, which is, you know, it's a balance. You know what I mean? It's like you can't, you know, destroy something that's a truth. You know, truth will always will out.
Well,
you know what I mean?
Yeah, I've always found it impressive that she hasn't just kind of rested on her legacy and just taken a step back and just thought, well, you know, now I've got all these outlets, now I've got all these things, I've got a cult fan base that will probably never die. I'll just continue to churn it out. I always feel it's really impressive that she still goes out there and she does risk some criticism, but she doesn't care because, yeah, exactly as you say, fundamentally, being an agent of change, that's who she is. And I think that's amazing. I don't know how old she is now, but maybe like 67 or something like that. But that's pretty impressive, someone that could just stick with what they've done.
Her pension is paid. You know what I mean? Now she can go back to core value. I mean, that's, you know, where it's at really with her. She, you know, I wanted to get more political. You know, she can afford to, in a sense, be more in your face than she's ever been before, because, you know, at a stage in our world with, you know, the global brand and the way it's taken over, and it goes straight from catwalk to, you know, computer to high street, you know what I mean? It kills designers' passion and the slow burning of a designer's intent to grow a collar bigger, because that's their prerogative. If it's straight to high street, then that designer's gone because their trend is destroyed, it's put into grazia, it's kind of made into porridge, do you know what I mean? And nobody believes anymore. So that's you know, something that I'm inspired by. What Westwood did was to hold on to a value, and you know, every piece I make is one off, and which is a complete opposite to what everybody's expecting from a brand, because people just think it's a t-shirt company, you know what I mean? But I have a core build, and they're like, no, this is a one-off. It's a protest. It's a, you know, it was once a Nike t-shirt, now it's a Noki, do you know what I mean? So what's Noki? Off the back of Nike, off the back of Adidas, you know what I mean? And, you know, and the things I've done, those companies have bought into, and they love it because it gives them the street edge, the street couture edge that, you know, they're sort of always looking for, which is what got them there in the first place, because they were just sportswear companies. They weren't fashion. They were just a subversive angle done by the 80s casual, you know, to wear sportswear instead of jeans and a t-shirt, you know. They wore trainers. I mean, I'm the generation where we were stopped going into clubs because we wore trainers. Clubs had to be invented for trainer wearers, you know. And that to me is what my core value of what a brand is, and what, you know, you know, my generation made those brands, you know what I mean, because we took them from the sports field into the street.
There's a weird thing though, isn't there? Because you know, if you're looking for a good person, to an extent, vanity is always considered a sin and a bad thing, and so good people tend not to be vain. But any government, because I kind of don't agree with that either. But like any government, because you know, Gandhi was a dashing dresser, Mandela was a dashing dresser. Like all revolutionary leaders, like looked great in their 20s. But like
public eye demands it.
But any government that tries to ban fashion is always like the most evil. Like the Islamic movement, the Chinese communists, the Puritans. They're the most evil. But there's this weird tension, because also like fashion's great, but it also ends up with like people just spinning off into, you know, with Kanye West. So he's a revolutionary and he wants to like really good stuff. He wants to do really good stuff, but he also just can't help loving fashion, and he can't help wanting.
And can't keep his mouth shut.
And can't. And,
yeah, but you should just stick to music and wear other people's fashion and try to be a fashion designer. I don't get that. To me, that is where the problem is. People wanting to be talented where they're not talented.
Well, he would say "fuck off" though, because
well, he would say that to me, and I would welcome the argument, because at least then I would fly off the back of his press. You know what I mean? It'd be great.
Because but that's not the point I'm trying to make. Is that there's this really weird thing, you know? Because was it Adam Ant? You know, he was talking about this. About the kind of, he was like, what's the hobnailed boots that you think are so dashing, and that kind of in Dandy Highwayman, and he's like thinking about, you know, that real pressure between like asceticism being good, and then Westwood doesn't represent asceticism. I mean, punk might have for a second, but she represents like, you know, pattern and flower and beauty and like power of aesthetics.
Well, craft to me is what.
Yeah, which is all the opposites of what traditional socialists think of as good.
Well, it's that fine line, isn't it, between fashion used as just a medium of expression of identity and having this solid identity, and now more so than ever in the public eye, and then it tipping over into that point where it becomes just that kind of peacock domain, where it becomes like fashion for fashion's sake and a completely shallow, hollow sort of entity. And I think that it's just a quite fine line to walk. I mean, you know, even punk. I mean, now we look at punk and you can describe it as an aesthetic because, you know, you'll have like Grazia describing things as, oh, you know, this is a sort of punk luxe sort of thing, you know, because it's kind of moved a long way on, hasn't it? But if you think about it then, you know, actually what it represented was something much deeper. So I think it's just, there's always that fine line. I mean, Kanye's a whole different discussion.
He's a whole world.
I think we might need another panel for that.
Yeah. Sorry,
drop the subject basically.
No, I'm just enjoying that tension in Westwood's own between wealth, between enjoying fashion.
A couple of years ago, I was at this fantastic Lovey Fest, which is called Woman of the Year, which is quite a wonderful thing. And Vivienne was given an award or something, I can't remember what it was. Anyway, she went up on stage and talked about her causes, and literally she'd been going on for 10 minutes. And she actually did say it was so fantastic. Have I been going on long? So this rhetorical question to the audience, and she got a standing ovation, but she was the only one of the night who did.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, she is our fashion queen, you know. She's took something and made something out of the destruction of, if you look at the 70s, you know, the bin bags piling up, you know, that was her aesthetic. You know, and the volume of her dresses is that aesthetic. You know, she carries on the core value of her design inspiration through her trying to make good out of bad.
Plus, the thing with Westwood, of course, is that it's her own label. You know, she started it, she's there right the way through. She's still helming something which she can talk about very much from the heart. She doesn't have to, I mean, of course, you know, you have sort of, you know, whether it's stakeholders or whatever, I don't know if she does, but she can still pretty much say what she wants, whereas the vast majority of huge labels now have someone that's representing a bigger entity. So actually, they're always going to have to be censoring themselves to an extent. That's always going to be, the ideology will be clipped, whereas her brand is her ideology. It's one and the same. So for her, it's very different, and that's why I think, again, it's another brand that's still relevant in the days of mega brands.
Yeah, I'm going to say something that sounds vaguely critical of Vivienne, but I'm not, because I love her. But there is this whole area, we were talking earlier about sustainable fashion. So what I would like to know, and I don't know if anyone does know, is how, you know, you can say stop climate change on a t-shirt, but do you then follow those practices, does she then follow those practices through the manufacture of her clothing production? Because there's a lot of sort of not very friendly processes involved in the fashion industry and in fashion production. And I don't know how much she addresses that.
She talked a little bit about, so she was talking about jersey. She has some jersey now that is totally environmentally friendly. So I think she does have a bit of a struggle with the bigger company, and I think she is slowly implementing that. I think we should look at the collection.
I hope it's going to be fabulous, considering the big direction.
Of course it's going to be fabulous.
Blame it on her designers then.
Well, yeah. Her love.
Andreas, yeah.
Her passion and her...
Wow. This is quite different, isn't it?
It's quite space-like.
Yeah, quite sort of android, quite sci-fi.
Are we seeing a bit of Cyberdog coming through, maybe?
Yeah. She's referencing biker culture. Did I read that somewhere?
Sorry. So, I shall read. I'd love to be able to do it in Vivienne Westwood's voice, but I can't. For this collection, we started looking at the Earth from space, studying different times and civilizations through anthropological eyes. There is an influence from sci-fi films that use ancient geometric shapes and symbols to reflect the future, yet still emanate the past, and this feeling of 1970s Bowie futurism. Which I guess they mean dystopia, because he was obsessed that the world was going to end, wasn't he?
I mean, I love the, sorry, carrying on, but there's one beforehand, there's patchwork going on, which I love, because I have to patchwork to make my things, you know, different textiles. So, I mean, I can see patchwork even though it's done through padding. So I'm starting to see kind of like more of a workwear aesthetic coming through, which is more important than, say, the original core value of that label, which was dandyism, you know, which has kind of killed itself a little bit with the Geordie Shore style. Do you know what I mean? Sort of straight gay is kind of killed.
It's interesting. I was
at
about
the edge of originality for that look.
I was about to say before we saw this shot that it's kind of one of the first menswear collections I've seen that appears to reference sort of the idea of futurism more than historic or classical references, which is kind of interesting. But then actually looking at this, that's maybe not entirely true.
They're still doing the Patrick Cox bag boots from 86 or whatever.
Well, there's always, because of Anglomania and Red, that I know the ladies collect, but there's always a kind of heritage element to Westwood, isn't there? Because that is what sells.
Yeah.
And they kind of, as much as they move the collection on, that you know, they pump a lot of what they sell is a heritage collection, really. But last autumn winter's collection also had a lot of these very modern shapes in it. Whereas summer was definitely a bit more what you'd expect.
With some of these, there definitely seems to be a little bit of that kind of.
It's great though.
The Bowie.
This is the 50s futurism that's coming through here.
Yeah.
But there's almost like a sense of that Bowie, you know, the film The Man Who Fell to Earth.
Yeah.
There's a touches of that in there, which is.
And I'm loving the android hair.
Yeah.
It's very nice, boot, like just thick boot polish on it.
There's been quite a few menswear shows actually that have used that hair.
Yeah.
The
That's
James
a great
Long
shoot.
show was very similar, wasn't it?
Yeah. And those are all drawn in hairlines too.
Is that a reference to cancer? Eventually we'll have to draw our hairline in.
Or just...
As everything falls out and
mannequin.
falls apart. Mannequin.
It's very mannequin.
Just replace our body parts entirely.
Yeah.
It might also be because there's a lot of long hair on models.
Yeah.
And so it's a way of getting, you know, of styling it out of the way.
And there's a workwear coming through there. I noticed that's very the length with the shorts coming and the printed on the. Is that printed or maybe it's much more printed, isn't it? Or is it a weave?
Can't really tell.
Yeah.
I'm still kind of waiting to find out what the connection is to the active resistance manifesto to see what that might be. But I don't. I mean, I quite like the fact that you can't always see it super literally. Sometimes you can, obviously, with the Bradley Manning t-shirts. But I'm trying to work out what it.
That graphic was very Westwood. That.
This is very forward-looking, or very contemporary, I feel, for Westwood.
And it's a high-waisted trouser, which I'm a big fan of as well.
Yeah.
About time, just low slung is well out of balance now.
Stephen, perhaps you have something to say on the development of Westwood as a designer over the years.
I mean, it's funny to see this because, you know, we were talking just before about Vivienne being this sort of great, huge influence. And then it's sort of slightly strange to in a way see the contemporary reality of it, which is not as out there in a way as you would imagine, because she is showing a fashion show in Italy now in 2014. So in a funny way, yes, you do have to fit into that idea that it has got to go on a coat hanger and has got to go around somebody's legs, which hasn't always been part of her, you know, the deciding factors of what she does.
I like the high definition on the waist. It's certainly above, cropping near belly button, and that jacket there is really nice. I like that underneath.
Yeah.
I like the gaiter detailing on the trousers as well.
Yeah, that makes it
and
more
it's quite subtle.
Yeah.
I'm not a fan of a tight trouser, but you know.
It's hard to carry off.
No, I'm not a fan of a tight trouser. It's kind of a bit, you know, this whole emancipation of man thing through fashion has gone a little bit too far. It's like I'd like to see masculine models. Nazir did it, I think. He was the most successful one of the whole troupe. He brought masculinity back into the club.
But you're like the masculine.
I do try.
No, but you know, because you really like, you know, that whole kind of 90s idea of that late 90s idea of the masculine homosexual. You know, like the Ryan McKinley, but you know, the way you used to dress in running around Shoreditch, the idea that in Shoreditch you could never tell who was gay and who was straight?
Well, the whole idea of Shoreditch was it was an empty zone. Nobody had any labels. It was a dead zone. There was nothing. There was no...
Great jacket.
Yeah, it's beautiful, that.
There was nothing to define what we were. You know, it was like the new Camden, the new, you know, Portobello. So we kind of made it up. Our costumes came from the...
Now we're going here.
From the free
Yeah, wow.
piles.
No, that's good. Now we're getting going.
This is a bit more
Yeah.
Tokyo vibes, though.
Yeah. Harem pants.
Westwood collar.
It's quite an eclectic collection, isn't it, actually?
When you thought there was a navy suit.
Yeah, just when you think you're getting a
Five
grip
outfits
on it.
ago.
And then, yeah.
I have found that with other collections that she's done there. That there's,
Some of this
there'll be
long-
a suit and there'll be a sportswear thing, and there'll
Yeah.
These long tops, though, are perfect for now. Perfect for, you know, there's so much length around in menswear at the moment.
be, yeah. It's really changing.
It's
the
nice
silhouette,
because
isn't
it just covers that whole thing of boxer shorts out, bums showing. There's a ridiculous walk that some guys do these days to keep their trousers up. You know what I mean? It's just gone to a... I mean, even I did that walk, but that was in the, you know, in the 90s in Shoreditch. You know what I mean? Where a certain major journalist shouted at me, "Pull your trousers up!" And I was like, "Oh, you got that trend wrong, babes." You know what I mean?
It's funny though, isn't it? Like the one, if you look at the one before, and if we're like, it was only about 5 looks beforehand, and we had like the full sort of the dandy suit that you were sort of railing against slightly.
Yeah.
It almost feels to me like you can kind of see the global outlook. You can see this, a designer that's thinking about all their different, you know, how they've got their tendrils out everywhere with these collections. It sort of feels like you could siphon them off into different countries almost.
Yeah.
For me, I don't know about you, but
Yeah, no, that makes absolute sense. She's I mean, sorry. Stephen.
Hello.
Queen Viv.
She is.
I like how her flowers match his kilt. She's got such a repertoire of things to do,
Yeah.
which are all hers, that she created
Yeah.
and she did the best versions of. Very
Yeah.
easy for her to pull those things in. And sort of almost do it like a men's couture show, which is about each outfit's just about that one particular outfit, and each thing's sort of seen as an entity within itself, as opposed to its most important thing being telling a story between outfit number 1 and outfit number 20, which are where a lot of other designers who are less established have to go, because they have to tell one very strong message, because that's their time. But Vivienne can actually tell lots of different messages.
Because these are almost, they're so different from the looks that came later.
I mean, if you saw a lineup of all those different outfits, that would be great. Sort of wardrobe of different things to wear.
Yeah.
I mean, I think
This middle one I like. I think there's a nice shape in that.
That is,
It's great to have.
I like the lines running through it. It's very direct cutting. I don't know. There's a kind of slash through there that's quite vicious.
and there is an exploration of sportswear, and sportswear is a big thing for men, isn't it? In sort of distending the silhouettes, and she's starting to play with that a lot too.
Have you worked? How often have you worked directly with Vivienne? Have you worked directly?
Yeah. Well, I did The Crown many years ago,
Oh.
which Nick took the fantastic picture of. Yeah, I've worked with her, and in fact, I worked with her for last summer, which was the first time for a long time.
For men's?
No, for women's this is, and I've sometimes done men's hats, but not for a long time. It's always a complete adventure with Vivienne, you know. She drives you nuts, but it's the most wonderful experience that anybody could ever have.
You get there in the end.
I'm not sure about the gold outfit though.
It does. I like the volumes in it, obviously, but yeah, whether the gold works or
It's
not.
a
I
bit
don't
Jeremy
know.
Scott somehow.
Yeah,
Oh,
that's
God.
a problem as well in fashion. Yeah, that stuff. Yeah.
it's one of the only ones that you wouldn't. I couldn't really see her mark in it. I find it quite difficult to find the Westwood in that.
Even though
outfit.
amazing, she was the first person to do gold foil on clothes.
Oh,
Remember
yeah.
when she did all
Yeah.
those Baroque things in the, like in the late
Yes,
80s? She was actually the first person to use that
Yeah.
technique.
Yeah.
Amazing.
So
Now
perhaps
everybody
it's a nod
else
back
looked
to
at it.
that.
Yeah.
So as you're saying, perhaps the collections are just going to get bigger and bigger, so she can kind of
Well, she-
re-reference her entire archive over and over.
She
in
said.
new ways.
She said to Tim Blanks in Interview magazine that that she is almost more of an assistant to Andreas for the menswear.
Well, didn't he take on that role to be the head? That's his baby, isn't it?
Mm.
Yeah.
She was saying that she really is the assistant in that relationship.
But she also said that he draws from her women's wear, both historic and current, quite a lot for his ideas.
I mean, I never really saw why it was defined as, because when I grew up there was just Westwood, and it didn't really need to be male or female. It was just Westwood. The famous red suit, the bondage suit. It was just, I mean, it changed my mind about everything. About, I was a raver, but when I saw that picture, I was like, I really want to be him. So that's from a kid who was a raver, who was at the beginning of hands in the air.
Yeah.
Craziness, ease and all that kind of stuff, where fashion was destroyed because of raving. But I still saw that picture and was like, oh my God, that so she was still able to stick a torch up to style and tailoring and everything that I didn't get a chance really to embark on.
That grey suit, number 22, is such a fantastic shape.
It's lovely.
How it's like really tight over the chest and then flaring out with those diagonal buttons.
And it's funny, isn't it? Because you can almost see those sort of very English inflections in some way, whether it's the check or the sort of top half. And with the bottom, and even with the kind of slipper style shoes, you've got this sort of Italian thing creeping in. It's sort of, I like the fact it's quite hard to place. I like the fact you feel like it's even funny is a bit strong, but there's a sense of humour, there's a sense of wit in there, which you definitely, I've read a couple of interviews between them when they've been interviewed at the same time, and he definitely seems to have that sense of humour and that wit. There's a slightly sort of that Austrian off-kilter expression there, I think.
Yeah, what are his, what's he, because we spent so much time talking about Dame Vivienne, but what's he like?
Andreas, flamboyant, a real club person, I always think, and he was Vivienne's student.
At Vienna.
He really learned everything from her. But he's that sort of slightly loose, dandy, fantastic,
inquisitive.
Person.
Quite bohemian, do you think?
Yeah.
What's his take on fashion?
Vivienne.
It's not a bad take, is it?
It's right. He's right in there, up to his neck.
You can see his style is. I think he designs for himself, for her. That you can see that connection between what they have and what they love of each other. That he's turning himself onto the catwalk.
Okay, we're going to have to say goodbye to Stephen.
Goodbye, Stephen.
Really carry on.
Nice to see you all.
I think I've got to unplug myself.
You need to throw down your microphone in a half.
You're done. Yeah. You're done.
Okay. Hi. Oops. Okay.
Thank you, Stephen.
Bye, Stephen.
Bye.
Oh, thank you, legend. So it's really nice to see a sharpness in there. I mean, I think there was a bit last autumn, winter too, but it's nice to see it not just a sort of collection of heritage pieces that sometimes I feel it can fall into.
I think what's interesting is that we started off the panel talking about her politics. I don't know what the politics are here, actually.
I think that's the problem with a big global brand. It kind of has to abandon, but somewhere along the line it still holds true because she's still alive.
Yeah.
It's when she goes,
She's still
God
her.
forbid.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? But that's when things change. Every brand changes when the pillar leaves. Everything comes crashing down, and the business comes in and builds it back up again.
And there probably is some kind of message here, because I mean, the Menswear 2 seasons ago, she said it was to do with climate change and to do with India and to do all these other sort of mistreatments of various places, and it was pretty difficult to see it in the actual collection. So I think, but by virtue of who she is, and those press releases will get distributed worldwide. That it doesn't need to always be super literal.
I mean, I love that about her, but then there is also that kind of problem of the, the radical chic and the Mau Mau catching. that I think that I do feel like that, you know, Tom, American dude that wrote about the Me Decade, writer, Tom, anyway, so super mega famous writer whose name I can't remember because I probably had glass too many. He also wrote about the Me Decade, and he also wrote about, you know, radical chic and Mau Mau, and it's this idea that, you know, the bourgeoisie were all sort of supporting the Mau Mau in Kenya, and sometimes I get a bit like that with people who wear Westwood. It's a bit like I'm going to put on this really decadent jumper and not think about any of the things that Dame talks about, but, you know, I put on this jumper, I bought it, you know, what the French call the bobos. The bourgeois bohemians. It's a much bigger thing in Paris. They're very big on it. Yeah, and sometimes that kind of, you know, because you get people that, yeah, it's like, because it is very classical. There is this, a lot of the way that people actually wear Westwood is massively classical.
I think what she started and what she's got now is exactly what is true to what is going on in the world. I mean, it's the hypocrisy of being entertained. You know, we've got more serious things going on, but since plastic money came in and everybody all of a sudden elevated to kings and queens, you know, that, you know, there has to be something to spend money on.
Do you think? What do we think of the adverts? Because there was a lot of controversy about the Westwood adverts that were set in the African street markets. I loved them. I loved them. And I thought this is brilliant. In the middle of glossy magazines, you've got these pictures of the real world. I thought they were fantastic, but a lot of people found them in very bad taste.
Because it was exploitative.
But Westwood was bad taste. She was punk. You know, it's like, this is the thing with Westwood. It's like bad taste, hypocrisy, the whole thing. That's all her mood board. So, in a sense, because she's a big global brand, the fact that those words are all coming up, she's keeping true to her, you know, brand.
When you said the ads, sorry, I can't bring them to mind. Are they pictures of Vivienne and Andreas in the slums?
I can't remember if Andreas is there, but there's like Vivienne and she's got a bag, and quite often it's like how when you get the African immigrants in sort of continental Europe, and so they'd have all the bags like laid out, but it's also in a kind of, you know, the kind of slums, you know, where they don't have drains, like real slums, like Nairobi slums.
Yeah, that is quite controversial, isn't it?
I wonder if she just left them for them to take rather than take them back.
That would be.
That would have been fun.
I think if it hadn't been Vivienne as well, because you know her and you know she cares, it would have been more in bad taste. But because it was kind of her, but it is tricky using that as a backdrop.
Yeah, but I mean, it depends whether she's using a backdrop as in kind of, you know, mindless glamorization, or whether actually it's a comment on consumer culture and copyist culture. I mean, again, it sounds to me like it's going back to all these things where she said, okay, so I know there's a bit of a problem here with saying, actually, you know, let's have sustainable fashion, but I'm still producing shitloads of stuff. But she has said, you know, clearly, but if you're going to buy something of mine and buy less. So I can only assume it is a kind of comment on that, you know, huge or sort of rampant consumerism and the fact it's stretching to every part of the world now. I don't know. I mean, I can't actually picture the images either, but I'm assuming that must be part of it. Must be a conscious thing.
I think you're right.
But I think we're expressing the essential contradiction behind the brand itself. So, you know, it's. I mean, we can't put our finger.
I mean, because she knows that clearly, and she knows that's a contradiction that unfortunately you can't get away from unless she actually just sort of says, right, I'm shutting up shop and I'm not going to produce things anymore because that's wrong. So,
well, you know, one of the sexiest things I think she talked about, or has talked about, because it is quite interesting. I mean, Karl Lagerfeld often gets annoyed because essentially his fashion isn't as on the ball as it once was, and he says, you know, I'm not a philosopher, but he's really good at being a philosopher, and he often quotes Marcuse, who's this amazing kind of almost postmodern Marxist, and Westwood is a great philosopher. You know, it's amazing listening to her interviews, and one of the best things I think she was talking about was stop consuming. You know, she keeps saying stop consuming, stop consuming, and people go, well, that doesn't make sense. But actually, all our icons in society are people that work hard. You know, that make things. All, you know, hip hop's obsessed with working hard. Lady Gaga sings about working hard. You know, style culture is full of reverence for people who work hard, and she keeps talking about produce, make your own thing, and I find that really
But it's
exciting.
that thing, isn't it, that but we're always saying that therefore working hard has to be synonymous with having a lot of stuff. You know, this sort of idea of someone, there's a book to do with the idea of stuffification, that we're actually just kind of stuffed to the gills now with things.
But she's talking about making things.
Yeah, whether we're, you know, we go back to a culture where actually, you know, her entire aesthetic, I mean, same with you, DrNoki, it's, you know, it was always about DIY, it was always about, you know, making things just because you wanted them, because they didn't exist, because it fitted in with your ideology. And you know, I'm kind of going off on a tangent now, but yeah, it's that idea, there's a contradiction here, but...
Well, I mean, for me, I want people to buy craft. I want people to know that somebody has handwritten a label in for a change, you know, has hand-placed a print on a T-shirt, has claimed back landfill, turned it into an art canvas and given it back to a customer that is dying to spend money, you know, that is looking for the Westwood-esque element of rebellion within fashion. That's all I'm here to do. The rest of it, I've got to find new ideas, be inspired by myself, stick to my own brand values.
I mean, I do think the discussion about consumption is a really important one, because it baffles me that it's just, you know, more and more and more. I mean, I was amazed. I got an email from, I think it was Topshop the other day, about a Topshop resort collection. I was a bit like, what the fuck, really? Oh my God, you know what I mean? It's just literally every week to be able to sell something more and more and more.
And I think that's a political angle in itself, because you know, revelations came out recently about where this money is coming from to be able to PR themselves into everybody's mind constantly and have really rich people, top models, all that kind of stuff. You know what I mean? They have budget, and we know where that budget's coming from, but people still go there. So there's a problem within society that they don't care. We have the same problem with Starbucks, or the rest of people still sitting in those shops endorsing it. You know, when there's great coffee shops that do artisan coffee properly, you know, which is bought and which has become part of, and it's learnt from Starbucks.
I mean, I do think we're maybe in a place where
society's the problem. It needs to get a grip. It needs to police its own politics and stop taking the piss as if it's punk to stop.
I do think we're at a sort of tipping point, because that idea, you know, was before the hip hop culture was sort of working hard, as if working hard has to equate with spending money. Maybe it's actually about, maybe it's going to be about learning things, about enriching ourselves in other ways. Not saying that, you know, we shouldn't be buying fashion, of course not, but maybe it's time to slow things down and have a kind of slower mode of consumption again. Do we really need collections? You know,
well, you know, one of the
every 3
they
weeks.
have factories to pay for, aren't they? They have you know, sitting about. It's a bit sitting about. When industry sits about, it gets nervous. It has to
it's
create.
It's just to propel growth,
volume,
isn't it? But
to survive.
But really, as a brand, you know, I mean, if I was helming a brand, I'd be thinking about how you sustain yourself. I mean, really sustain yourself. You know, and maintain that as being an iconic brand. Surely nobody has the energy.
I don't think the problem isn't sustaining. I think the problem is growth, isn't it? It's just like trying to drive growth all the time. It's trying to
more
grow
collections to sell more.
Exactly. Drive profits to shareholders.
It's trying to get society addicted to the right things, and that's the thing. Where, you know, addiction is the new addiction. You know what I mean? That's the problem.
She pushes education. You know, she's massively obsessed with education. She's massively obsessed with history. But I do think that her idea that you should be, you know, I think probably deep down she realises there's a contradiction between her brand and a lot of her philosophy. But I think, you know, her idea of producing stuff, I mean, there is such a philosophy as producerism. There is a, it's associated with small enterprises, and there's a kind of right-wing version and a left-wing version, and but you know, it's all about how do you make it easier to produce, and how do people produce, and people are generally happier if they're producing. And they're making things, and you know, and she does rail against the idea of just consuming, and I guess.
But perhaps it's a question of not producing things, 10 things a week, but producing things at a slightly slower pace. So it's still the kind of same level of energy or passion invested in production, just doesn't have to be now.
Well, I guess for a lot of people, though, I mean. Feel like I'm doing Marx 101. Sorry. But like, you know, a lot of people are alienated from their production, so they're working in a mobile phone place, or they're like, you know, working in a bank, and they're like, what am I doing? Whereas, you know, one of the reasons why I'm so happy to have my not very well remunerated writing career is because because I get to make stuff all the time, and that's super cool.
I mean, at least I think, you know, if we're finishing quite soon with Vivienne, at least I think we probably all agree that at least she sort of actively, positively uses the platform that she has and the visibility. Yes. So even if there are contradictions there, at least she does it in a very wholehearted way, and at least she still believes in being an agent of change. Yeah. You know.
So just to swing it back to the collection. So
we barely talked about the clothes, really.
Yeah, no, we haven't, have we?
Yeah, no, not really.
How relevant is this to, you know, because Westwood is a big, you know, for Britain, she was a massively important thing, turning the British fashion industry into something. And you know, she'll always sell, and she has shops all around the world, and China's a big thing for her, although that she was saying that they're stopping their expansion in China for a while. But how relevant is this to fashion? Is this still a label that's pushing fashion forward and has got...
Is it pushing fashion forward? I don't know. I almost can sometimes tell what she's going to come up with.
It has its own client. It has a rich, Italian, gay, aristocratic kind of client.
You're right, actually.
It has its own database, because those people that's sitting in their purchase love a little bit of edge, so they get it through Westwood. Yeah. I personally would go Nazir, do you know what I mean? But, you know, I can see elements, he's starting to get bigger volumes, he's getting more hip hop, he's getting larger, he's throwing it in there to obviously grab the new look, you know? But for me personally, I love the 50s things. I would wear those high-waisted trousers, I would wear that 50s shapes. Because even though dressed like this, I also really like to dress smart.
Well, sorry, go. Well, I thought look 3, which was the first one we saw, was quite a different proposition for her. So that is a movement. I think Westwood also has, I know she's not quite heritage, but she is, she's a British brand, isn't she? Like she's British in the same way almost that Paul Smith is British, which makes them a great export to other countries. So she's still a commercial, thriving, viable brand. And also, I'm not going to make myself sound like a club kid, but about 5-10 years ago, when I was hanging out a bit more in the Brick Lane, there was a sort of posse of quite cool young men who really loved Westwood. You know, they were into the club scene, they were quite edgy, and Westwood for them was still a pinnacle. So she's got a very, you know, she's appealing to those kids, but she's also appealing to the bigger markets. It is a clever mix. She continues to do it. I think this collection will continue that, and I think she'll continue. It's a clever formula.
Well, that aristocratic rebel seam in society does love it.
Yeah, yes, they were.
And she has. Sorry.
They were aristocratic rebels.
I like that. And yeah, she does have her. I mean, you know, one of the strange things, you know, in Leeds, Westwood was the first sort of designer shop other than a Harvey Nichols. It was the first single line designer shop to open, and it does incredibly well. And it was all
the kids in the clubs that were wearing it. I mean, I went to university in Leeds, so and a lot of my friends, guys would wear it, and it was funny. I mean, straight guys, a little bit camp, fitted in really well with the kind of flamboyance of being on the club scene. So that's predominantly where it was being worn, as far as I could see.
Yeah.
So I think it's a really interesting collection. I think there's definitely a lot of hooks in there for a lot of different clients, I think.
And I find when I look at Westwood's collections in the past, you know, there's the crazy piece, there's mixed with a very, you know, wearable piece that you could easily integrate into your wardrobe. She's not completely out there, you know, and that's part of her skill, and Andreas' skill.
I want to see her design with Nike or Adidas, see what she comes up with.
There's also a sense of humour, I think.
Yes.
There's a lot of the looks, if you actually look at them again and you sort of think, you know, you'd have to have a bit of a sense of humour to wear them. Even if you were like a die-hard fashion victim, in a way, I think realistically you'd need to have a bit of a sense of humour to wear some of them.
Like the gold tracksuit.
Yeah, and like massive Harlem trousers with this sort of, you know, quite straight top. I think, you know, it's people that kind of have to be a little bit self-aware enough to wear it, either sort of fashion educated or self-aware enough to wear it.
I mean, she's fashion genetic. I mean, the orb is the most amazing symmetrical, brand ident that I've ever seen. I grew up with it. I was in awe of it. It was futuristic. It looked like a planet, even though it was royal. It was regal. It transformed. It grew really well. It turned into necklaces really well. It was an object. She knew, there was, I don't know quite where, and it worked because it was the anti-establishment taking the piss out of the royal. Do you know what I mean? And now it's turned into,
it's funny, isn't it?
A brand ident.
Something that was almost like the orb, because it was almost like saying, I'm actually this revolutionary. I'm taking over. I'm the new queen. We can all do that. Yeah. And then of course, when it becomes big enough, it kind of filters into the mainstream.
And it's reflected in modern society because, with as I say, plastic money, everybody's now got a bit of money. It's whether you can pay the bottom line. That's where everybody's now walking about thinking, I'm great. I've got a key chain that hits the car and everything opens up and kids are going, Mummy and Daddy are superheroes, wow. I unfortunately teach those kids and they're F-U-C-K-E-D, up. Do you know what I mean? They haven't got a clue about reality. They've got no original thought process, and when they do, they're scared of it. They won't. I have to really encourage them to think laterally, out of the box, because they're like, but it's not trend. Why are you speaking that word to me? You are trend. You've got to design for your generation. Don't let the generation make you design. Because you're never going to succeed. You're never going to get past this panel. And it's a problem because since '95, there's a generation of people that knew black and white TVs that had to go to phone boxes. And you speak to kids nowadays and they're like, really? And they're like, whatever, do you know? And they're literally on their phones listening to YouTube while you're trying to teach them, and you're like, unplug, stop watching the video and listening to rolling up a fag, as if they're so distracted, and that's a rebellion.
That's a real issue now, isn't it? Just being fed things and being fed things wholesale,
like they're overfed, so
rather than discovering.
So what's the link to Westwood?
Sorry, but she is, the rebellion. That's what I'm saying. We need to find the new rebellion and the original thought process. She knew how to rebel and turn punk into something that still is now carrying through as a rebellious word, which is now the bourgeois buy into, and it still works for her. So.
Isn't that part? Because the thing is, rebellion was kind of easy when it was just having sex. And now that we're allowed to have whatever kind of sex we want.
Baby making isn't difficult anymore. It's not a big thing anymore, is it? It's like there's too many people in the world. Literally, literally too many people.
Terrible racist conservative viewpoint.
Okay. That's what I am. Brand me that way, that's fine by me. But I do think, there's too much. Maybe that's what you're saying, stop consuming. Maybe that's it, stop having sex.
Sorry, I didn't mean to slander you. Sorry.
No, I've been called worse.
Sorry. Bel, closing comments.
When I did some background reading on Westwood, I'm not sure this is a closing comment, someone said there's a formula to her stuff, which is that she'll take a traditional shape and then she'll distress it a bit. It's quite a punkish sensibility. I think there's a bit more of that here, but I like the collection. I do think it's, like I said, a movement. I think she has a lot to say still, and I think she's going to continue strong and present. Any more?
No, I mean, I was into that. I was very into your observation about the classic shapes.
Well, that's kind of what punk is, isn't it? It's about ripping the tartan and getting the orb and turning it upside down, making it crazy.
The inversion.
Yeah, the inversion of traditional heritage symbols, I think.
In the same way that Noki is an inversion of icon.
Yes.
Believe me again. But well, maybe I want to do a collaboration with you, babes, and then it'll become real punk. Do you know what I mean?
Is that your closing thought?
Yeah.
Apart from
let's collaborate. Let's turn it around.
And Katie, even sorry.
I wouldn't answer unless you called me Katie. I think the collection still feels strong, and I'm glad that we've had all this chat about someone's ideology and the product's still relevant. I think one of the saddest things would be if we'd been talking about her and who she is and everything she stands for, and then we'd have actually been presented with something that we actually felt didn't really mean anything in the landscape of fashion in terms of the product. So I think it's a success. Yeah.
Fantastic.
Makes sense.
Yeah. I think it's impressively forward-looking.
Yeah.
Well, it's young, it's hip hop, it's slouchy, you know. But there's, you know, for me it goes to the tailoring bits. I'll always love her tailoring bits because it goes back to the red suit with the bondage trouser and the hat, the black hat.
And it's stunningly well done, the tailoring.
And the details of the buttons, the beautiful gold buttons, then the orb kicks off again, and you know, things like that are what I will always remember and go into her shop just to see. I might not buy, might not even wear, but I have an affinity. I have a core value within me that will stick, and I'll always find time for.
It's like Stephen was saying, you know, with the boots, that it's almost like her paying homage to her own, you know, her historic successes, and I think that's nice. I think that's nice. I think that will chime with a lot of people. That will resonate with a lot of people.
It's a typically diverse collection as well. I mean, you know, there's that cliche something for everyone, but there is actually something for everyone in this collection, which helps her stay commercial, and yeah, it's good.
Thank you, Bel. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Dame Westwood.